Hey everyone, Stakey here. Once again, thank you all so very much for your understanding on my break this month. If you don't know what's going on, I have a update video that I think I will link in the description. In case you didn't see, I posted that. And yeah, I just want to thank you all so very much, seeing as this is the last video of this year. Thank you so much for your support of this channel and of the Be Still Just For Me series. It's such a blast to record and to reread this story again. It's not been so long that I've read the story, but there's just so much of the story that there are some details that you kind of forget here and there. And so yeah, just rereading it again is just such a treat for me. As I'm sure that it is for those of you who have read the story before, and it must be a treat for those of you who are listening to this for the first time. So once again, thank you all so very much, because I wouldn't be where I'm at without all of your support. And definitely thank you once again to Witch of Writing, especially for allowing me to read this story out, because without her permission, I would not be able to do this. So yeah, I just wanted to wish you guys a happy holiday, Merry Christmas to those of you who celebrate it. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful new year as well. I will see you guys back in, I believe it was the 7th. Yes, the 7th of January is when the next chapter will be up. Any updates or anything that happens, I will post on my community posts. But yeah, this is the last video of 2021. I will see you guys in 2022, and I hope it's a great year for all of you. All of us, actually. Let me include myself in that too. Let it be an awesome year for all of us. Okay, enjoy the chapter. Bye guys. I love you. Kisses. Bye. Sometimes you dreamt of memories, splashes of colors and figures enduring through time like landmarks. Other nights you didn't dream at all, and awoke as though no time had passed between your head hitting the pillow and the rise of the morning sun. And other times, like tonight, you dreamt of riding a vacuum cleaner through the sky with a trail of flying pizza slices following closely behind as you soared across the blazing silhouette of a full moon while cackling like a witch gone mad. In a rarity, you awoke a few minutes before your alarm actually went off in mild confusion. When something exciting or new awaited you the next day, sleeping sometimes proved difficult as your mind struggled with restlessness. The bizarre dream you had wasn't exactly the most immersive experience either. Work. No, wait. Realization hit as your eyes flew open. Trip. We leave today. In less than 2 hours. You mumbled while looking at your phone. The thought of spending 3 days with Bakugo away from the city and the intrigue that came with it helped wake you up quicker than usual. You still had to send a message to your boss claiming to be sick, however. After composing an email with the perfect amount of vague and specific details spattered in to avoid them asking for intrusive information, you sent it off and hoped for the best. If they question me Monday, it's not like I can just take back the day. Oh well, not gonna stress about it on my one vacation. You decided it was best to shower and get ready first before waking up Bakugo to avoid any grumpiness he might bring with him due to lack of enough sleep. Digging through your drawers, you picked out some comfortable clothes for the day since you'd be both sitting for hours in the car and exploring the outdoors once you arrived at the cabin. Bakugo would surely want to get out and utilize every spare moment for his underused quirk. Bakugo seemed to flip-flop between curling into himself with the blanket wrapped around him protectively in an undulating mass, and splayed out as though his body wished for far more room than your couch offered. Right now, he fit the latter, one arm draped at an odd angle behind his head and over the arm of the couch while one leg dangled on the floor. It was incredibly tempting to give him a good morning kiss, but he'd probably headbutt you on accident considering the past times you'd woken him up. After you showered, brushed your teeth, and made yourself presentable for the day ahead, you packed up all your bathroom essentials into a plastic bag so they wouldn't leak on your clothes in case a bottle popped open during the trip. With the bag in hand, you came out of the bathroom and padded softly up to the sleeping man on your couch, wary of what he might do when you woke him up. You took a step back and nudged him in the shoulder with your phone. Sure enough, Bakugo sat up quickly as a small popping noise came from his palms, although his reaction time seemed a bit slower than when you presented him with Kirishima's note. His crimson eyes cut to you, and he lowered his hands, grogginess etched into the lines of his face as he glared weakly at you. "Ohayo! Get up, sleepyhead. We leave in a little over an hour," you said with a chipper tone that he didn't mirror. Bakugo definitely wasn't a morning person, at least not right when he woke up. Neither were you, but excitement acted as your adrenaline. You heard him mumble something under his breath before you slid back into your room to finish packing. The bag filled with soap, deodorant, your toothbrush, and so on went into the side pocket of your pack. Phone charger, what else? That it? With one final sweep across your room, you grabbed your bag and headed out to set it by the front door. You opened the fridge to see the cooler that Bakugo packed the night before. He'd emptied out at least half of the fridge, and you wondered what he was planning on making, but right now breakfast was the main thing on your mind. He won't miss a few eggs, right? Digging them out of the cooler, you got to work fixing a simple breakfast that would tide you over until lunch later. A separate bag, leaned up against the wall, held dry groceries he'd packed, and you noticed he'd missed a very important food item. As you cooked breakfast, a package of cookies laid hidden from view in the filled-up bag. Bakugo stood in the shower and let the hot water loosen his muscles and ease him awake. He was really going to be able to use his quirk, to train again, to bask in the adrenaline rush once more, and it was all your doing. How would he even begin to pay you back for everything you've done for him? He loathed feeling indebted to someone, but had few ideas on how to equalize things despite your insistence that it wasn't necessary.
She can suck it up when I figure it out.
Once he was clean and presentable, Bakugo grabbed his own bathroom necessities and opened the door only to narrow his eyes when a familiar fragrance wafted into his nose from the kitchen. Sure enough, he saw you plating breakfast for the two of you. His eye twitched on reflex that you'd snuck around to take over one of the few things he could actually do here.
"Oi!"
he called out, and waited for you to turn around. When you did, he immediately pinpointed the shit-eating grin that reeked of an "I cooked and you can't do anything about it" sentiment. After you set the plates down on the table, you grabbed your phone and turned back to him. "Hey, hold on." You pulled out a plastic bag from underneath the counter and handed it to him. "Here." Bakugo looked between the bag and you before asking,
"What's that for?"
"So your soap and stuff doesn't leak on your clothes in case it gets jostled around." He stared at you blankly and made to turn around to finish packing, but thought better of it, snatched the bag out of your hand without a word, and tossed everything into it. The last thing he wanted was for the few clothes he had to end up sticky with shampoo, but refused to openly admit your sound logic. "Wow, you really are grumpy in the mornings," you joked behind his back while sitting down to eat.
"You're stuck with me in the car for 2 hours, so watch it,"
he flung at you before sitting down himself. The food looked and smelled decent, but he needed to taste test it first. "Or maybe you're stuck with me, smartass." You seemed full of energy, which made Bakugo assume that the trip was nearly as important to you as it was to him. At least you weren't tired, which reduced your chance of crashing on the road, and he could feed off your enthusiasm to finish waking up. When he actually took a bite of his food, a kick of unexpected spice hit his tongue.
Not bad,"
he admitted, while trying to downplay how much he really liked it. Still, your eyes lit up and it reminded him to toss out compliments more often, especially after the word salad he spit out the previous night. A couple of hours to get there, and I have to get gas before we leave. I got some energy drinks yesterday. I don't know if you drink those or not, or if you want coffee or something else. I just know the drive won't be super exciting looking down the same stretch of road and trees for an hour.
All yours.
While he chewed another bite, you stared at him as though expecting some other answer.
What?
Nothing, just I pegged you as a coffee drinker. Guess not. You were surprisingly good at figuring out things he gravitated towards, but on this you truly were wrong.
No, I prefer tea if I need caffeine. That's why I packed it.
Bakugo nodded over to the bag of dry groceries that sat by the door. I guess tea is more popular in Japan. More for me then. You shrugged, and the two of you continued with breakfast in relative silence, before Bakugo stole the last bite right off your plate and, taking advantage of your incredulity, snatched up your plate and brought them to the sink. Hey! He sent you a
"Do not fight me on this"
glare, before it transformed into a smirk as he stood at the sink and began washing dishes. As much as you wanted to bicker about chores, you needed to finish getting everything ready before you left for 3 days. You grabbed one of the energy drinks out of the fridge and slung both your overnight bag and the bag of dry groceries over your shoulder in a precarious balancing act before grabbing your keys and pointing to the front door, signaling to Bakugo that you were going out. Since you hadn't driven in a while, dead leaves and a dusting of pollen coated your car as cool autumn weather began to roll in. Guess I'll need to get it washed. But then it'll just get dirty again. Whatever. You stuffed the bags in the back seat and your drink in the cup holder before heading back upstairs to your apartment. Bakugo seemed to be waiting for you with his own bag and the cooler in his hand. Holding up a finger for him to wait a minute, you made one last sweep of the apartment to make sure nothing was forgotten and everything was turned off. The last thing you wanted was to come back to a burnt-up home. Stove is off, got my phone charger. Okay, I think that's it. If I leave something, I can live without it. You slid on your sunglasses, grabbed your purse and phone, and locked the door behind Bakugo, who practically power-walked down the hallway and stairs. Apparently, the reality that you were leaving had properly set in, and you figured he wanted to get done with the road trip and on to using his quirk as soon as possible. Bakugo was already sitting in the front seat by the time you climbed in and buckled your seatbelt. His hands behind his head signaled a relaxed mood, but his bobbing knee told you he was ready to pop from impatience. It was kind of cute. You sorted through your email to find the address the rental company sent over and plugged it into the navigation app to check the route. The first hour involved very few exits on a highway you felt familiar with, while the second half of the trip meant winding through a small town before climbing up unmarked roads that hugged the mountainside. At least you and Bakugo could talk for the first hour, but after that, you'd need to concentrate to avoid getting lost. "All right," you said, positioning your phone into the dashboard display with the translator app pulled up. "I need to get gas, but after that, we're on our way."
"Hurry it up then,"
he chided while staring straight ahead through the colorful sunglasses he'd claimed as his. You drummed your fingers on the steering wheel and clicked your tongue, mirroring the idiosyncrasy he did so often. "Want to try that again?" Rather than change his wording to something more polite, his mouth just thinned in a quiet line as the car continued to sit idly. "Thought so." With a knowing smile, you pulled out of the parking lot and officially began your 3-day vacation journey with Bakugo. You hit a bit of traffic on the highway towards the outskirts of the city, since people were still heading to work at this hour, but you knew that it wouldn't take long before the cars thinned out and you could turn on cruise control.
"What the fuck is that?"
Bakugo leaned forward in his seat to get a better look at some atrocious-looking car in the next lane.
"Are those neon pink hubcaps? God, those are ugly. Like something Raccoon Eyes would like."
Raccoon Eyes? You'd forgotten his nickname for Ashido at the moment, so your questioning was genuine.
"Another hero back home. She has pink skin and black eyes and awful fashion sense.
It wasn't the first time you'd wondered what would have happened if someone less human-looking wound up in your world. Ashido, Tokoyami, Shoji. She would have a hard time adjusting here if it was her and not you if she looks like that. Bakugo remained quiet for a full minute, as if mulling over his words before he gave an answer softer than you anticipated.
Guess I'm lucky it was me then.
Without any acknowledgement of his action whatsoever, Bakugo reached across the center console of the car and grabbed your hand while staring out the passenger side window. You managed to keep your delight over Bakugo's small, yet large for him, act of forward affection under control with just a small smile. The double meaning of him feeling lucky and the possible reference to your own slip-up about feeling lucky to know him that he'd honed in on over dinner 1 week ago wasn't lost on you. Squeezing his hand slightly, you stared ahead at traffic and savored the feeling sitting warm and safe in your chest. Once traffic finally let up and the tall buildings and frequent exits were replaced with miles upon miles of trees and uninterrupted asphalt, Bakugo felt both more at ease and more excited the closer to reality the trip destination became. His calm was broken when some dumb fucker on the road cut in front of you without a blinker to scrape across 3 lanes of traffic and exit off rather than miss the turn and take the next one. You ripped your hand out of his and flicked off the oversized vehicle before yelling, "Oh, fuck you and your ugly oversized truck! Absolutely stupid idiot driver." Bakugo's eyes flickered between you and the exiting truck before sputtering out a laugh.
And I thought my insults were rude.
He joked.
Probably the same assholes who rev their engines at midnight just to piss me off.
That seemed to ease your tense shoulders a bit. Ugh, you deal with that type of junk too back home? He hummed in agreement.
They shut up when I yell out the window at them.
But you started. Then you're the one being loud. Arguing with you about the logistics of screaming out a window in the middle of the night apparently made time speed by quicker than you'd realized. You held up a hand to pause his rant before pointing to your phone. Sorry, gotta pay attention to where I'm going now. The route will get more complicated and unfamiliar.
If you give up, then I win.
He jabbed before he switched over to the navigation app. Indeed, the scenery had changed. If he narrowed his eyes at the horizon, he could spot what were possibly the same mountains that you were driving towards. It was serene and quiet, far different from the loud and boisterous noise of the city. Fewer cars, smaller businesses and buildings, and an overall small-town vibe oozed from the street signs and old roads. You played music from your phone through the speakers, but kept it low enough to still hear the directions spouted off from the navigation app. He had to trust that you could follow the roads without getting lost, because if you didn't know where you were going, then he definitely didn't. At some point, a song came on that Bakugo wasn't into, and he skipped to the next one with a press of a button. He felt your eyes on him, but refused to acknowledge his smart-ass behavior in your own car. When he landed on a song that wasn't terrible, you actually started to hum the rhythm. Part of him wanted to hear you belt it out for his own amusement, because you seemed like the type of person to sing in the car. But before he could encourage you, the directions took you down a dirt road and you stopped humming as the car eased up a winding hill. Holy shit, we really are on a mountain, huh? Up, up, up you went, passing cabin after cabin. In his impatience, Bakugo rolled down his window slightly and took a gulp of fresh mountain air. It was cool and clean on his face and reminded him of his hiking exploits back home. He loved the smell and was glad that, despite the change in location, some things always remained the same. The trees became denser and cabins were spaced further and further apart as your car continued to rise and wind up the narrow roads. At this point, you were going more off the memorized directions in the email sent to you rather than the map, since it had specifically said, "Don't follow GPS, keep left at the fork at some point." A lone mailbox stood to the right of a gravel road with a winding path covered with fallen leaves leading down and away towards... I think that's it. You stopped your car just before the mailbox, put it in park, and turned off the engine. Bakugo looked over to you for confirmation and, when you nodded, a grin split his handsome face before he flung open the door, barely remembering to unbuckle his seatbelt in his haste. Jeez, hold on, you laughed while getting out of the car yourself. Stretching up towards the sky, you shook out the stiffness in your legs after sitting down for so long, but Bakugo wasn't about to wait around for you. He already had several bags flung over his shoulder by the time you ducked down into the back seat to grab your own. It was enough for the two of you to carry in one trip, although the weight was unevenly distributed, with Bakugo carrying all of the food as though his impatience had overtaken the muscles in his legs. As the two of you walked down the path towards the cabin, you noticed it looked slightly different from the pictures on the website. Small details. The door was on the left side of the porch rather than on the right. The window shutters were painted dark green as opposed to brick red. Maybe you were misremembering from a different cabin you looked at? Still, the outside was beautiful, if not simple. Worked stone lined the front porch where several matching woven chairs sat with autumn leaves resting atop the pattern. 2 wind chimes hung from either end of the wooden porch, stained the color of rust, jingling in the cool breeze. A padlock secured the front door closed. Let's see... You pulled out your phone to type in the combination code to the lock. Bakugo's foot tapped on the wood, and you knew he was probably staring at the door through his sunglasses, hoping it would combust so he could get inside already. With a click, the lock popped open and revealed a key. As soon as you unlocked the front door and led you both inside, you gasped and Bakugo whistled. It looked far larger on the inside than it did on the outside. Everything was decorated in theme with the outdoors. Red and green plaid curtains covering the windows, a chandelier above the kitchen table that looked to be made of antlers, and a warm quilt laid over the back of the comfortable-looking couch. It smelled like firewood and pine needles. Hell, even a fireplace sat at the other end next to the back door that led to a second covered porch. It had modern amenities as well, a flat-screen TV, Wi-Fi, heating and air conditioning. You really hit the jackpot with this place. You pulled up the translator app and turned to Bakugo. Well, what do you think? He set down the bags and managed to tear his eyes away from the sight to stare at you with those beautiful eyes of his, while he pushed up his sunglasses.
Nicer than I thought it was gonna be, not gonna lie.
Stepping forward, he yanked you towards him and planted a kiss right on your lips. You could tell he was smiling into it, and you knew right then that the trip had been worth it. Separating sounded like the worst idea, but he did it anyway, his eyes glistening with warmth. There was work to be done before the two of you could explore, however. Bakugo busied himself with putting up the food while you plugged in your phone and grabbed your bag to head up the steep wooden stairs that creaked under your footsteps and pick which bedroom you wanted. Something was very wrong, though. No. There were 2 doors upstairs. You opened one to reveal a hall closet full of towels, spare sheets, and pillows. Please. You quietly begged before opening the other door into a single bedroom with 1 queen-sized bed in it. There was only 1 bed. You shook your head in disbelief. This is definitely not right. I made sure to pick a place with 2 bedrooms. Dropping your bag in front of the bedroom, you took out your phone and pulled up the email the rental company had sent. This isn't... I knew it looked different on the outside. This was supposed to be a relaxing and cathartic weekend. No stress, no problems. The apparent mix-up would not make Bakugo happy, especially after he'd agreed only after asking if he'd get a bed to sleep in. Obviously, he wanted to use his quirk, but you knew it must have sealed the deal. You wanted desperately for him to enjoy himself here. Hell, maybe even bask in a bit of secluded cabin sappy romance if you buttered him up enough. But you had to get this figured out first. You bolted downstairs past Bakugo, who called out to you from the kitchen and out the front door, your fingers quick to dial the rental company at the bottom of the email. Hello. Thank you for calling Happy Cabin Rentals, where happy cabins make happy renters. Please press 1 for cabin availability. Press 2 for customer service. The automated voice on the other end droned on, listing numbered options. When it finally reached one that could connect you with a live person, you smashed your phone screen with your thumb. Come on, hurry up. Some awful elevator music, thick with static as though they hadn't changed the song out in 20 years, blared in your ear as you hopped from one foot to the other in impatience. When someone finally picked up and the music stopped, you took a deep breath to calm yourself.
This is Chattiston. How can I help you today?
The hell kind of name is... Ugh, whatever. Yes, hello. I rented a cabin this week and we just arrived. There's been a mix-up. This isn't the cabin I rented. You quickly explained. This guy had better sort things out before you blew a gasket.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that.
He replied in an obviously rehearsed tone.
Let me just pull up your information.
You told him your name, the date you rented the cabin, and the confirmation number on your email.
So you ordered the... yes. I see the problem. You rented a larger cabin, one with 2 bedrooms, but our system somehow sent you to a very similar cabin with only 1 bedroom. So you are correct about the mix-up.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Can it be fixed? You heard typing on the other end and wondered if he was really writing something or just tweeting about some dumbass customer he was talking to on the phone.
I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, but the cabin you rented is currently unavailable for the weekend. It's occupied.
Your mouth hung open in stunned shock. Occupied? Wait, okay, hold on.
We can schedule you for next weekend at the proper cabin. Does that work?
He asked without skipping a beat. Did this happen often? Did the people in the other cabin get a free upgrade? What? No, I need it for this weekend. Chattiston harumphed over the speaker. You were normally nice to customer service workers, but this situation was almost nightmarish.
There's no need to yell, ma'am. If you're unsatisfied with your service and would like to dispute the charges, please dial the financial department and they can help sort out a partial refund. We hope you enjoy your stay at Happy Cabin Rentals. Have a good day.
And with a deafening click, the asshole hung up on you. Holding your phone away from your face, you saw your pissed expression reflected in your phone screen and almost threw it across the yard. Oh my God, you... Ugh! If you could borrow Bakugo's quirk and blow up that jerk on the phone, you would have. But you didn't, and instead settled on kicking a pine cone hard enough to scare a squawking bird minding its own business in a tree. Bakugo had seen you run out of the cabin and assumed it wasn't anything important, or else you'd have told him. He'd found the cookies you hid in the bag and rolled his eyes before setting them with the other dry groceries. Once he was done putting away all the food, however, he heard you distinctly cursing up a storm outside.
The hell is she on about?
He walked through the front door and saw you boot a pine cone a decent distance and could practically see the steam rolling out of your ears. Something had obviously pissed you off, and he was about to find out what.
Oi,
he said, before grabbing you by the shoulder and turning you around. Your expression was split somewhere between upset and angry at an intensity he hadn't seen from you yet.
Nani?
Was all he managed with your phone down at your side. You avoided his scrutinizing stare before pointing to the cabin and shuffling towards the porch. Confusion and concern spread through Bakugo as he followed you inside before you turned to him slowly as though trying to hide a secret you didn't want to reveal. Don't be mad, you finally said, still avoiding looking at him.
The hell are you talking about? Why would I be mad?
He crossed his arms and stood waiting for you to explain. You groaned one last time before giving in. So, there was a mix-up with the cabin. You started before holding your hands up defensively. It's not my fault. The fucking idiot on the phone just... Ugh, useless, unhelpful. He snapped his fingers in front of your face to keep you from gripping your phone hard enough to crack the screen.
Focus. Spit it out already.
They sent me directions to the wrong cabin. This isn't the one I rented, and I guess the people who were supposed to be in this one got ours. Your words were quick and trailed off at the end as though it answered his question, but...
What's the difference?
He asked. Wincing, you continued with the last piece of the puzzle. There's only one bedroom in this one. When your phone translated, Bakugo stood and stared at you, his eye twitching involuntarily. Apparently, whatever contorted face he made on impulse riled you up even more than you already were. But don't even try to argue because you're obviously getting the bed after being on the couch for so long. Bakugo ran his hands down his face in irritation. Even though this wasn't your fault, he was notoriously bad at misdirecting his anger. It was one thing he never quite grew out of.
You are out of your damn mind if you think I'm making you sleep on the couch here.
He spat, knowing an argument was coming. No, you're crazy if you think I'm not giving you the bed. You stood your ground and stared up at him with unmoving resolve. What the two of you failed to realize was the fleeting, blush-inducing thought that popped into your heads at the same time.
We could share the bed.
Too bad both of you ignored the obvious solution in favor of nervous reluctance. The staring contest lasted a full minute, neither of you giving in before Bakugo glanced up at the clock displayed on the oven. He was here to utilize his time and the location effectively, to let loose all the pent-up energy he'd been hoarding for weeks. However, this setback would get resolved before the day was done.
Later. This isn't done.
He stated with a conversation-ending tone before turning towards the kitchen, but your voice made him pause. I'm not changing my mind. It took years of mental training to get to the point where he didn't literally explode during disagreements, but the turnaround from excited to annoyed was too quick for him to process effectively.
What did I just say? I'm making lunch. Don't argue.
He pointed at you, and it seemed to get the message across even though he felt like a bit of an asshole. Which was more impactful at his blow-up? The lack of fear or presence of tenacious determination in your eyes? He wasn't sure.
Don't tell me what to do.
You muttered, too low for him to hear as you turned on your heel and left him in the kitchen, in favor of putting your things away in the bathroom. None of this was your fault, so getting mad at you served no constructive purpose. It wasn't supposed to turn out this way, but you'd fight him over the sleeping arrangements before letting his stubbornness win. Really, it wasn't as though you hadn't slept together already, although a bed was definitely different than a couch, and falling asleep together on purpose held a different connotation than on accident to the gentle sound of rain. You thought about asking if sharing was that big a deal, but decided against it, especially with how adamantly he argued. He was Bakugo, after all. The last thing you wanted was to put him in an awkward position, and you knew how much he wanted to sleep in a bed. A couple of nights on the couch wouldn't kill you. Now, if he asked you, well, you weren't going to say no. You logged into the cabin Wi-Fi on your phone before you put your soap, toothbrush, hairdryer, and everything else away in the bathroom. By the time you freshened up and came back out, Bakugo was done fixing a simple lunch for the two of you. It didn't escape your notice how tense he looked, and you almost wanted to give in to his bickering just to lighten the mood, but you weren't going to be pushed around by anyone, Bakugo included. Sparse conversation was littered among the clinks of forks against matching plates. Both of you avoided the bedroom dilemma as though tiptoeing around a large puddle. Bakugo ate quickly, his restlessness back in full force as he cleaned up before you even finished eating and grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. You stuffed the last bite of food into your mouth and hurried along before Bakugo went out to train without you. Hold on, you said, gesturing him back towards the table. A welcome book sat in the middle filled with relevant information. How to use the washer and dryer, check out procedures, what to do if the breaker flipped, and so on. Here's a map of the area so we don't get lost or anything. Bakugo scoffed, but grabbed up the map anyway.
"I never get lost,"
he stated confidently before turning towards the front door.
"We'll explore until I find an open area where I can use my quirk without setting the whole forest on fire."
Maybe that will put him back in a good mood, you hoped. Grabbing a bottle of water yourself, you packed up your things, including some cookies, and followed Bakugo out. Oh, there's probably no cell phone signal if we go out too far from the cabin, so we might not be able to talk much. You brought the dictionary, though, which was hopefully good enough. If he was busy training, then there wouldn't be much conversation anyway.
"We'll talk when I'm done. My quirk can get loud, so it would be hard to hear you anyway."
After locking the door, the two of you headed in a random direction, and you took note of where the cabin was to the best of your ability. The air was clean, and birds chirped overhead among the tall canopy of trees as the leaves beneath your feet crunched and small twigs snapped. You wore a light jacket since you weren't sure how long Bakugo wanted to be out, but assumed it would be at least an hour or two. Even though he held the map in his hand, Bakugo didn't bother looking at it as he walked ahead of you as though he really did know where he was going. At one point, you came upon a small waterfall that led into a babbling brook, the clear water eventually disappearing into a crowd of trees. Occasionally, you heard a branch break or a disembodied noise from a random direction, which would have been unsettling if it wasn't for the picturesque sunlight streaming through the leaves. It truly was peaceful here. Bakugo seemed to take in the serenity as well, his head swiveling whenever a bird sang or a squirrel skittered between roots and bushes. Eventually, the two of you came upon a fairly large clearing. The long-cut stumps of trees lay around the outskirts as though this particular area had been swept clean by a massive broom. Bakugo paused and surveyed the area, stepping into the middle and turning around once, his gaze lingering on yours for a moment before his face lit up with that familiar smirk of his.
"Here,"
he said, pointing down at the ground, and you understood that he'd found what he was looking for. His palms started to spark and smoke and glow as though reflecting back white sunlight like a mirror. It matched the hue of his straw-colored hair. You could see his muscles twitching with anticipation and figured it was a good time to step back for your own safety, despite your own excitement bubbling up at finally seeing him let loose. You'd never seen him set off anything other than minor sparks, and you immediately felt the calm before the storm, the quiet before the explosion of sound. Watching him in the anime was one thing, and even as a teenager, his explosions were massive and destructive. His strength had surely grown over the years, so you decided it was best to shield yourself behind a tree for the time being. Bakugo rolled his shoulders, stretched, shook out his hands, and tilted his face towards the sky. And then, he unlocked the chains that had been holding him back for over 2 weeks. He shot up into the air with a burst far louder than you expected, and you were forced to cover your ears from the jarring reverberation. What you also didn't expect was the heat that rolled off the flaming remnants in the clearing. It felt like you were standing in front of a bonfire. How was he not deaf by this point? Once the initial shock wore off, however, you slowly opened your eyes and couldn't help but stare. It was as though Bakugo moved in slow motion through the air, falling through an invisible sea with a bed of trees at the bottom, like rising kelp surrounded by smoke and sparks. The wild grin he wore and the exuberant laugh that escaped out of him set your heart beating against your ribcage like the pounding of a drum. You'd never seen a more beautiful sight. He flitted this way and that, performed flips and complex maneuvers in mid-air before landing for only a moment and continuing with his routine like a gymnast on the mat. Reading your novel seemed like an impossibility with how loud it was. You really wish he'd warned you so you could have brought some earplugs. You wondered if, besides quirks, people in his own universe were different in other physiological ways. Maybe they were more resilient or had higher tolerances for things like loud noises and extreme temperatures. People would have adapted to the development and evolution of quirks, right? Grabbing the bottle of water you brought, you watched as Bakugo continued to run and leap and fly, changing direction almost effortlessly. This was his element, where he belonged. Well, he didn't belong here in your world. Bakugo would inevitably return to his own universe where quirks were normal, where he didn't have to hide. You slid your emotions around the sting like stepping over a thorny bramble, scraping your skin, shallow, not quite deep enough to make it bleed, but it still stung. Bakugo finally felt free, truly untethered as soon as he'd let loose his first gigantic explosion to boost him up into the clean mountain air. The heat on his skin, the adrenaline rush, the fiery glow, the scent of smoke in his nose. He hadn't realized how much he missed it, craved it, longed for it until it swept in like a tidal wave, crashing upon him and soaking him to the bone. It took a while for his muscles to loosen up after weeks of minimal exercise, but once he adjusted, nothing held him back. He yelped, laughed, matched his voice to the sound of his explosions as though racing parallel to a non-existent finish line. At one point, he looked over to you, his worries and problems temporarily forgotten, and he couldn't help but match the mesmerized smile you gave him. As long as you were watching, why not show off a bit? Back flips, front flips, mid-air turns. Bakugo performed them all, familiarity flooding back to him. He lost track of time, completely wrapped up in expelling every frustration, every worry, every point of tension from the palms of his hands. When he finally felt like he needed a break and a sip of water, Bakugo landed solidly on the ground and walked towards you. He stretched his arms over his head, sweat dripping down his neck and back from the heat, even though he wasn't even that tired yet. You sat on the stump of an old log staring up at him with a cookie in your mouth like he'd been putting on a show just for you, and maybe he was, to some extent. You'd never seen quirks outside of his own, and the minimal sparks he'd shown you before were nothing compared to what he could really do when given the space and opportunity. He grabbed the bottle of water you held out to him before he sat down next to you and downed a third of it in one gulp. Shifting his gaze, Bakugo looked over at you, bathed in afternoon sunlight streaming through the trees, a gentle breeze disturbing strands of hair that framed your face.
She really is beautiful.
Urusai, you said, pointing up to your ears. The dictionary lay at your feet, telling him you must have studied it a bit while he was wholly engulfed in his quirk. Bakugo chuckled and took another sip of water.
Gomen.
He replied. It was true. His quirk was very loud, but he did give you fair warning earlier. He was used to the noise, the reverberation that echoed in his chest like fireworks. Ear protection was part of his hero costume back home, but he didn't even incorporate it until his second year at UA, when someone mentioned possible hearing damage due to prolonged exposure to his own quirk. He wasn't stupid enough to ignore a comment like that. Hesitation seeped into him, but he thought, fuck it, and decided to say what he wanted to say anyway.
Arigato.
The fact that he thanked you must have surprised you. That, or you weren't exactly sure what he was thanking you for, going by the confused look on your face. With his free hand, he gestured towards the woods, towards everything, towards this entire experience. He wouldn't be here without you after all.
Iroiro, domo arigato.
When was the last time someone put so much effort and consideration into his well-being, into his happiness? You planned this whole damn trip for him. Cooking and cleaning weren't nearly the amount of payback he wanted, but until he figured something else out, it would suffice. And even if he did come up with some way to reciprocate your effort, you'd probably just argue with him about it. Not that he'd take no for an answer, but your stubbornness matched his own. Damn, you really had turned him into a sap, but he wasn't too torn up about it, honestly. He'd nearly forgotten how flustered you got at the smallest compliment since you seemed to wear your humility on your sleeve. The way your cheeks flushed made him crack a small smile, and he knew he'd said the right thing. You glanced around before focusing heavily on the cookie in your hand. どういたしまして. You said in a small and slow voice, as though remembering on the spot the proper word for what you wanted to say. He really needed to make more of an effort with your own language at this rate. You then held out said cookie to him, but before you shoved it into his mouth, he rolled his eyes and took it himself and bit into it.
Shit, not bad.
He now understood why you'd brought these along. Once he finished the cookie and polished off another gulp of water, Bakugo stood up and, with one last glance in your direction, headed back out into the middle of the clearing to train until his muscles gave out. The hours passed by like this, Bakugo firing off his quirk with you watching him. Eventually, you adjusted to the noise level, but it was still impossible to focus on reading your book. At one point, a squirrel had hopped over, undoubtedly drawn by your cookie crumbs, but before you could give it a piece, Bakugo scared it off with a particularly loud explosion. At least tonight I'll get some peace and quiet. Well, hopefully. You still had this bed situation to deal with, but you weren't going to let him win without a fight. When the sun began to set behind the line of trees, casting a mandarin glow across the forest floor, Bakugo finally seemed worn out from training. Despite the initial excitement seeing him use his quirk, you'd gotten a bit bored just watching him for hours on end. He walked over and gestured back towards the way you came, so you packed your things and walked side by side with Bakugo. Considering there were no lamps or artificial lighting in the woods, you knew it was best to return to the cabin before dark, or else you'd surely get lost. Once you unlocked the front door, Bakugo's eyes practically lit up when the kitchen came into view. Using his quirk non-stop for hours must have worked up an appetite. You were pretty hungry yourself, since cookies weren't exactly a filling dinner. Now that you could talk to him properly with the Wi-Fi connected, you pulled out your phone. I know you packed the food, but I can cook too, you know. That seemed like quite a workout. Bakugo turned to you and crossed his arms defiantly as though defending a flag from a hostile enemy takeover. Not a chance, unless you want to fight me for the kitchen, he challenged with a glint in his eye. Headstrong until the day he probably died, you rubbed your temples and sighed. You still needed to convince him to take the bed tonight, but judging from how tired he probably was, maybe you could wear him down. Well, at least take first dibs on the shower. I swear I won't touch any of the food, you suggested while trying to look convincing. Bakugo clicked his tongue, but ultimately chose to believe you. He probably didn't want to cook while drenched in dried sweat anyway. I won't be long. He grabbed the bag with his things and disappeared behind the bathroom door. As tempting as it was to start dinner without him, you didn't feel like getting into a second yelling match. Arguing just felt wrong with how well the two of you managed to get along most of the time. It was a petty fight anyway, over something stupid that you shouldn't butt heads over, but he wouldn't be Bakugo Katsuki if he gave up easily. While Bakugo showered, you sat down on the couch and turned on the TV, flipping through the hundreds of satellite channels. You didn't have cable at home because most of it was garbage and Netflix supplemented most of your media needs. Eventually, you left it on a cooking channel that was looping some dramatic competition to find the best chef. True to his word, Bakugo exited the shower, a cloud of steam following after him. His hair was damp and he looked more relaxed. You couldn't help but stare at the handsome man you were sharing not only your apartment with, but your time and energy too. He'd become intertwined in your life, and you avoided considering how you'd felt when he left just as suddenly as he'd arrived. Bakugo was surprised to find the kitchen in one piece. He was positive you'd go behind his back and cook again. He caught you staring from the couch and returned it briefly before tearing his eyes away to get started on dinner. Once he decided on a recipe and started chopping vegetables, he looked over towards the couch to see it empty. Where'd you? A melody echoing like a siren's call seeped in through the bathroom door, and he drew the conclusion that you were singing in the shower. It had been a few days since he'd last heard you, and truth be told, he'd missed the sound. Sound carried even better here than in your apartment, your voice bouncing off the cherry-stained wood. He even turned the volume down on the TV so he could hear you better. It took a minute or two for him to figure out the settings on the stove since it was different from what he was used to, but luckily universal symbols and numbers translated well enough. He looked up when the bathroom door squeaked open and caught you smiling at him, making his chest flutter. You walked past him in the kitchen, grabbed your phone from the counter, and opened the front door to walk outside. A window situated at eye level let Bakugo see you leaning on one of the support posts on the porch and look up towards the dark night sky. From his own camping ventures, Bakugo knew that you'd be able to see far more stars out here without light pollution compared to in the city. No cars, no buildings, no people, only hooting owls of the night and wispy breezes in the dry tree leaves. He turned away for a moment, but looked to see you pointing at something outside. You turned on your heel and burst through the door, practically sliding into the kitchen to grab him by the arm. "Bakugo, you have to come outside right now!" you ordered while tugging him away from the hot stove. "Oi, the fuck? What's wrong?" He managed to toss the large spoon he was holding into the sink before getting dragged outside with more strength than he assumed you had. "Just hurry up!" Once the two of you stepped off the porch, you pointed up towards the sky. When Bakugo craned his neck to see, his breath caught in his throat as though swept away in a gust of wind. It looked like a watercolor painting, a mix of blues and blacks and hints of purple towards the solid tree line. Thousands upon thousands of white twinkling stars lit up the sky, tossed there by the goddess of night herself, a blanket of night to shroud the sun. Some of the lights split and soared from one side of the atmosphere to the other. "I think it's a meteor shower," you whispered next to him, your hand still resting in the crook of his arm. Bakugo looked over and saw fireworks reflected in your eyes, a light show only he could see. You then gently yanked on his arm and pulled him down to your level to capture him in a chaste kiss, not unlike the one he'd surprised you with earlier. It was far too romantic of a scene for you to let the opportunity slip away. He melted into you, joined at the lips by a mutual desire to savor the other. You were so tempted to close your eyes and kiss him until the stars in the sky surrounded you and lifted you, weightless, until you disappeared into the twinkling lights. But a timer in the kitchen went off like a school lunch bell, interrupting the moment. You could tell Bakugo was hesitant to leave since he lingered, his breath hot and uneven on your skin. Eventually, with one last starstruck stare into your eyes, he straightened up and moved back into the kitchen to prevent dinner from burning. Looking back up, it seemed like the meteor shower had passed, and you literally thanked the stars for showing up at the perfect moment before heading back inside yourself. Sliding back onto the couch with a glance in Bakugo's direction in the kitchen, you posted a quick picture you took of the meteor shower before you grabbed him from inside. Since you weren't an influencer, you didn't sell anything or have a brand to promote. Your social media was full of selfies and pictures of your friends for the most part. The cell phone camera quality didn't capture the true beauty of the sky in person, but at least you had the memory to look back on. "Oi, food done," Bakugo called from the kitchen without the need for a translation. Your own stomach was growling since you hadn't properly eaten since lunch. It looked like he'd cooked more than he usually did. Maybe using his quirk accelerated his metabolism too? You weren't sure, but everything looked and smelled delicious, so you weren't about to ask why or complain. The two of you ate in relative silence with the TV idly running in the background. "I didn't get a chance to tell you when you were outside, but wow, Bakugo, you're even more amazing using your quirk than I thought you'd be." Just as you suspected, Bakugo acted predictably by leaning back in his chair, smirking, and oozing confidence. "Of course I'm amazing with my quirk. Did you expect less?" Your eyes rolled at his swollen pride. "No, it was like, I don't know, you looked like a phoenix flitting through the air in a trail of flames." The analogy came to you suddenly, and it just seemed to fit. His fork stood still in the air, paused on the way to his mouth as he looked up at you as though you'd said something absurd. "A phoenix, huh?" He seemed to mull over the comparison for a moment before he said, "Besides the rising from the ashes bit, yeah, I can see myself as a badass mythical firebird." Your ego is showing. You joked before taking another bite of food. His eye twitched and your lips tightened while trying to conceal a smile with a fork in your mouth.
Is it my ego if it's true?
He rebutted. You opened your mouth to argue but decided better of it despite the temptation. Keep him in a good mood. You scraped your plate clean and sighed with satisfaction. Ah, delicious as always. Bakugo got up to take your plate away despite your protests of doing it yourself.
If you think you're trying to butter me up about the bed, it won't work.
The fact that he'd wisened up to your plan shocked you for the perfect amount of time for him to grab the dishes out of your hand. Okay, no, listen. You started, grabbing your phone and following him into the kitchen. You're logical, so let's look at the facts. 1, you haven't slept in a bed for weeks. It'd be unfair if I took it. 2, I can tell you're tired after all that training. 3, there's no solid reasoning why I need the bed. And 4, you wiggled your fingers and couldn't really think of a convincing fourth answer. And 4, I will annoy you until you give in. What was he going to say to that? You deserved it because you drove here? Rented the cabin? If Bakugo could imagine up a realistic reason, then maybe you'd consider it. Bakugo shut off the water in the sink and glared at you. At this point, he just wanted to toss you in there and close the door, but the stupid argument earlier didn't sit right with him, and he didn't want to go to sleep with you pissed at him, not after the last time. But a solid reason for you to take the bed didn't fucking exist. As if on cue, the ghostly voice of Kaminari echoed in the hollow of his ears.
Just share it. You know you wanna.
His ears burned, but he ignored the coaxing voice. Exhaustion really had seeped into his muscles after weeks of not using his quirk as well, and a bed sounded so fucking nice. I'll take your silence as a concession. Rather than say anything at all, Bakugo just flicked water in your face, which only made you giggle. You're such a sore loser. Glaring in your direction, Bakugo watched you turn your back on him and dig into a basket near the fireplace for some warm-looking blankets. The idea of giving up made him want to growl, but maybe he could put up a fake front and just give in later? You didn't seem nearly as tired as he did, and when he was sleepy, his crankiness went up and patience went down. By the time you'd returned to the couch, Bakugo sat on it with his arms folded stubbornly, looking up at you. Smiling smugly, as though a plan brewed in that head of yours, he ground his teeth before you literally threw the blankets on top of him. His reaction time slow from fatigue.
Oi!
If you don't move, I'll use you as a pillow. You dared bravely as he fought to untangle himself from the blankets. He was tempted to set the damn things on fire, but before he did something brash, a heavy lump leaned against his side. When his head was free, Bakugo slid his eyes to his right. Your feet were propped up on the couch arm with your back reclining on his arm.
You're fucking impossible, you know that?
He grated out, to which you just laughed and opened up the novel you brought. And yet you came on this trip with me. You like me, don't deny it. Was his own smartass behavior this annoying to other people? The blanket was comfy and warm, and he couldn't help but sink into the couch while staring at the woman on the wall-mounted TV cooking in a bright and cozy kitchen. Impulsively, he snaked an arm around your waist but made no acknowledgement about it. He failed to see your smile into the off-white pages of your book. You made it about halfway through your chapter when Bakugo's weight shifted at your back. Is he? Craning your neck to check if he was really asleep, you saw his eyes snap open and cut to you before flitting back to the TV as he tried to play off his dozing. Go to sleep. Don't argue, you whispered. Muffled by the blanket, he probably cursed you, but it was weak and pitiful and incredibly adorable. You were about to ready for sleep yourself, so you actually wanted him to move and commit to the bed this time. So you did what any sane person would do. Attempted to shove Bakugo Katsuki off the couch. He could have easily overtaken you, easily won, easily wrestled and flipped the positions, but instead he stood up abruptly and threw a pillow in your face.
God, fine! If you want to sleep on the damn couch so badly, take it!
He practically yelled while tossing his hands up in defeat. All you did was stick your tongue out at him, and his eye twitched in response before he turned on his heel and disappeared behind the bathroom door, closing it with a snap. You switched off the TV and wrapped the blanket around you like a shawl, elated that you'd managed to beat him down. He came out of the bathroom and glared at you before bending down to your level.
Stubborn brat.
Speak for yourself. You puckered your lips, waiting for a goodnight kiss, but when it didn't come, you opened your eyes to see him smirking.
No,
he stated bluntly. Apparently, your immediate shift to a dramatic frown startled a laugh out of him.
That's what you get.
You're always stubborn. You saying you don't like kissing me? The question was so ridiculous and forward as you looked up at him through your eyelashes that he snapped his mouth shut.
If that's how she wants to play.
He cupped your jaw and lunged forward, locking his mouth with yours, moving with purpose and intention. He swallowed the gasp that escaped. It didn't take long for you to match his pace, but before either of you got too sucked into the moment, Bakugo pulled back and licked away the taste of you on his lips. That was the perfect way to shut you up, apparently.
Oyasumi.
He slurred before leaving you on the couch and heading upstairs. He glanced down at you from the second-story railing, and you looked up at him, eyes still dazed and dark, before he shook his head and walked into the bedroom. Once Bakugo was out of sight, you blinked yourself back to reality. Every time he literally took your breath away, you couldn't help but selfishly crave more.
I'll get my revenge.
You plotted through a yawn. You stood up and brushed your teeth before turning out all the lights in the cabin, nearly stubbing your toe on the couch in the process.
It's so dark here. Makes sense, but still.
With your phone plugged in and alarms turned off, you settled into the couch and wrapped yourself in a cocoon of blankets. It really was comfortable, but you couldn't imagine spending 2 weeks on a couch, and this one was bigger than your own.
He can argue all he wants, but he's getting a bed one way or another.
With the blankets pulled up to your chin, the forest canopy outside brushed away the stress and problems of the day and rocked you into peaceful slumber. Bakugo closed the door behind him and surveyed the room. A queen-sized bed sat in the middle with far too many pillows leaned up against the headboard, carved to look like tree branches. Next to the bed stood a nightstand and a lamp and a second bathroom attached to the other side of the room. Privacy. A room to himself. He never thought he'd appreciate such a simple sight. Tossing all but a couple of pillows to the floor, he flopped onto the bed without a second thought.
Holy fuck, this is comfy.
Well, realistically, it was too soft for his normal tastes, but he absolutely did not care. Bakugo took up as much space as possible on the mattress in comparison to the available real estate of your couch. It felt odd being on opposite ends, you on the couch and him in the bed. He leaned over and turned out the light and was plunged into pitch-black darkness. It was even darker in here than when he normally went camping in a tent without a roof over his head. As he settled into the cool sheets, his mind wandered again to how you'd set up this whole trip for him. Acting appreciative wasn't a skill he exercised often, but the embarrassed look you gave him at a simple thanks in the woods earlier overshadowed his pride. He'd kept himself in check this past week in terms of physical contact, but 2.5 more weeks was a long time. Giving in, wrapping you up in his arms, and succumbing to whatever unhindered longing that throbbed in his chest told him to do was tempting, but also dangerous. Leaving you now would suck. Hell, it would probably hurt more than he wanted to admit. If he got even closer, it would make things that much more difficult, for the both of you. Too tired to consider his options and weigh hypotheticals, Bakugo groaned into the pillowcase and closed his eyes as exhaustion finally overtook him, and he fell into a deep and uninterrupted sleep. Hell, maybe even bask in a bit of secluded cabin, sappy romance words. Lord. Hello. Thank you for calling Happy Cabin. I can't read this. Hello. Thank you for calling I can't with this word. Thank you for calling Happy Cabin Rentals. 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 Happy cabins make happy renters. Okay. Happy cabin. Cabin rentals. Happy Cabin Rentals. Okay. I think I got it. Changing direction almost effortless. No, not again. Effortlessly. And even if he did come up with some way to reciprocate your feck. He now understood why you'd bought these all along. Brought. Read right. Brought. Despite the initial excitement. What? Watching him for hours on end. What the fuck? He challenged with a glint in his eye. Let me record, please. Thousands upon thousands of what? I'm gonna fucking explode. Bakugo looked over and saw fireworks reflected in your eyes. A train? The fuck?